this demonstration we're going to look at creating a general file server cluster. In previous demos what we did is we installed the failover cluster feature, and what we also did is validate the hardware. So at this point here we're now actually going to create our cluster. I've come to my cluster manager utility, and in my cluster manager utility I shall select create cluster. This brings me into wizard, so on the before you begin all we'll do at this point here is select next, and now what we need to do is just select our two servers. So what we'll do is we'll browse through and add in our servers. So select browse, click my advanced button, I'll just find now, we'll go for the first server, and then what we'll do is we'll also add in the second server. So again, same steps. And at this point here we've now added the two servers. So now what we'll do is we'll select our next button. And then at this point here what we need to do is we need to give the cluster a name, and we also need to specify as well an IP address. So we're going to call this cluster 1. On the network 172.16.0.0, we've specified an IP address of 172.16.0.125 as the access IP address for our cluster. We'll now select next. Have a look down the confirmation page, select next. Now as you can see it's now creating the cluster. So at this point here all we'll do is we'll just pause the presentation and return back once the cluster has been created. As we can see now, cluster is now being created, so we'll just select finish. And then what we'll get is we'll get popping up the cluster. And in the cluster, cluster1.datum.com, we'll just expand this up. And what we want to do now is we want to add a file server application to the failover cluster. So what we'll do is we'll come to storage to start with, just to make sure we have our disks in place. Expand this up, have a look at the disks. And what we should be able to see here is we should be able to see the shared disks. So we have the shared disks in place. Now what we'll do is we'll actually create and configure a role. So we'll come to roles. We'll configure a role in our actions. That brings us into wizard, so we'll just select next. And then what we'll do here is we'll go for file server. And then we'll select next. For my file server type, we've got a file server for general use, or we've got scale out file server for application data. So what we get with scale out file server is we get a single write but multiple read points. But what we're going to do here is we're just going to go for a file server for general use and select next. Then what we've got is we've got our client access point. So at this point here we just need to give this a name. So all we're going to do is we're going to call this a Demo25. And the next thing we need to do here is just give it an IP address. So what we're going to do for this is we're just going to make this 130. And then what we'll do is we'll select next. This then brings us into our select storage. So what we're going to use for our storage is we're going to use cluster disk 2 for our storage. And select next. Read through the confirmation. We're happy with everything in the confirmation. We'll select next. It's now going to configure high availability, so we'll just pause the presentation and return back once this is fully complete. And then what we'll do, we'll just view the report, have a look at the report, happy with everything in the report, so at this point here we'll just select close, and then we'll select finish. And that's the end of this demonstration of creating a cluster for file services. Thank you.